Hey folks, happy Saturday and welcome to another episode of Plan A Conversation. So we are coming to you a day after our normal day on Friday, but we hope that we find you in good spirits. Happy Labor Day weekend for those who are remembering, those who celebrate. Also, happy Rosh Hashanah for our folks next week who celebrate that holiday as well. You guys have been emailing and DMing me about my nightly meditations. They are up on my YouTube channel at Plan A with Clay. So start to take a second to go through those meditations. Again, they are derived from my second book, 365 Plan A Nightly Meditations. Now you have a guided voice to support you in those meditation pursuits. So be sure to check that out. And so listen, for today's conversation, I am so incredibly excited to welcome a longtime friend, a longtime mentor, and somebody who really, truly helped me find my voice. And so I will get into that story a little bit later in the interview. So I am welcoming one of the most amazing people I've ever met in my entire life. I've talked about him several times on this podcast, Dr. Fritz Galette. Welcome, Dr. Galette.
Now I understand why my ears sometimes are ringing in a positive way. And I appreciate that. I was just commenting on how you and I go back over a decade now.
Yeah.
And it was fortuitous. The universe made our paths cross, actually in more than one way. So I'm just so happy to see you at this point. No, it's been a while.
Yes.
And let's do it.
Yeah, and it's been a while. So before we even get into our your work and what is it you do, just for our audience, I think you guys remember, especially in the first season, when I was telling you about finding your voice, when I was just doing a solo podcast, about how there was an individual that a colleague and friend walked a tape over that I did for Dress for Success some years and years ago. And he invited me on his then show that was at WWRL, right, Dr. Fritz?
That's right.
Yes. And when you sat down and you told me, you have a little bit of extra fire inside of you, and I need you to figure out how to tap into that when we're on air. And I didn't get that then, but Dr. Fritz, your voice is constantly in my mind before I'm about to do a television segment, before I'm about to do a podcast interview, or anything that has to do with public speaking. Do you remember that?
I do remember that. And I remember seeing that tape of you in Dress for Success. I don't know how it came across. We might have had a mutual friend that said, you got to check this guy out. So I saw it and I said, oh, someday I'm going to somehow meet this person. I want to meet that person.
Kidding me.
I don't think that was the initial connect.
Right.
And then when you did come into my life, I was like, I've seen you before. And it was that video. And then when you came on the show, I had read your book. A lot of times when you're interviewing somebody for a book, you skim the book.
Right.
I read your book, and I remember actually finding pages in the book where I would mark, and I probably caught you off guard. But I was like, on page 72, paragraph 2, you say this is amazing.
Yeah. And it was that experience. So thank you for being such a strong mentor figure and friend in my life for all of these years. And so segueing back to you and the work that you do, how do you define your call in the world, and what is the work that you do in the world?
Well, I'm a trained licensed psychologist, actually clinical psychology at Fordham University. And that training usually sets you off to do work in clinical hospital settings, mental hospitals, where you're working with people who are severely impaired due to a mental illness. And somewhere in my training there, I connected with working with a healthier population, people, like I always say, like you and me, who also needed some of the good stuff that we've learned in the research on how to help people. And that brought me to Midtown Manhattan, where I opened up a private practice office. My office was across the street from the Condé Nast building, which had lots of publishing companies in it, law firms, Fortune 500 companies. And I was meeting lots of people who were struggling, struggling with life balance, struggling with finding their voice, struggling in many different ways. And so that began that career as a therapist and as a psychologist. And I've been in Midtown Manhattan for since the late 1990s, early 2000s.
Whoa. So I bet the framework of just the town in itself has shifted and changed drastically since that period.
Oh, absolutely. When I moved into Times Square was still Times Square. If anybody remembers Times Square
Yeah.
of the 90s, it wasn't the kind of neighborhood you'd necessarily want to be planted in. And the Condé Nast building wasn't actually built yet. So a lot of my early clients
Mhm.
were people from the fashion industry, people from the media industry,
Hmm.
MTV, BET, the networks. And they could have been on-air personalities. They could have been people working the mailroom, everything in between. Um,
Hmm.
and it was a great space and a great place and a time in the city to really start working with people. And what I found out is there's no us and them in the world of mental
Yes.
issues. There's just us.
Uh-huh.
And I found plenty of people who could have probably been certifiable running things. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember working in the hospitals and going, you don't need to be here, but there's some other people. So when I was working in the city, it really taught me that psychology and the gifts that we can give people and share with people and teach people can really be utilized and learned and utilized to make our lives more quality.
Yeah, more quality. And so, what gave you the impetus to even start psychology in the first place? Where did that come from? Where was that drive?
It was probably just a fortuitous cross with a mentor who was a psychologist. Prior to that, I was headed toward that. You're going to be an engineer, doctor, or a lawyer.
Mm,
Probably I was going toward medicine.
mm,
And if you go back to my early years as a child, I was always the kind of kid that would look at an object or a thing and kind of like, turn your head kind of ways and go, I wonder what's going on in there. And so I would take apart things.
Hmm.
I would take apart things, disconnect them, and then try to reassemble them and build them up. So I was kind of got mechanically minded in that way. I remember taking apart a regular telephone, the old kind of telephone with the dial.
Yes.
I would take those things apart. And many times I couldn't figure out how to put them back together. But the phone I got back together again, parents came home, saw what I did. I relocated the phone to a better place in the house.
Hmm.
And I'd always been that way. So when I found psychology, I found something that I could kind of like, I wonder what's going on there. And, the rest is a lot of history, but it's been a career of that. And people who know me, the geek that has all the technical gadgets in his room, that's still me. Can't see in here. Over there, is turntable records, extra
Right.
computers, hard drives. I still do that. But I've also always been interested in the kind of technologies that can tap into our soul, tap into our bodies. I've got blood pressure machines, heart rate monitors. I also bring that into my work with people, show them how the body, not just the mind, is at work here.
Yeah. And that was one of the impetus and the reasons why, beyond our relationship, why I wanted to talk to you. A couple of friends, we were at dinner, maybe we'll say about 2 months ago, and they were asking me, do I think that there is some type of connection between psychology and spirituality? And I said, you guys wait. I am having Dr. Fritz on the podcast. He will break that down. So, for our listeners who are really struggling with this quest of mental health and also that spiritual, journey, how do we combine the two? Is there a crossover?
You have you great memory because you and I came at an intersection at a time where I think I might have even said to you, "I'm not religious. I don't know if I believe in any of that." And you talk about having an impact on someone's life. You were the one that said to me that always rang in my head that someday you're going to have the kind of experiences that make you go, "Hmm." I don't think you said "hmm," but you know what I mean. Where
I
you
remember.
remember, right?
Wow.
And I think recently I was as recent as earlier this year or last year. I think I sent you a message and said I'm on a call and I'm talking about psychology. I'm talking about human relations, interpersonal communication. I'm talking about all the isms, including racism, and what we can do. And I'm talking to a church group. I am the hired expert coming in to talk to a church group. And I had finished speaking, and the pastor said, so what Dr. Galette is preaching on. And he went to break it down. He wove some spirituality and religion in it. And I was like, yo,
Hmm.
I just came full circle.
Wow.
So I've had I've had numerous experiences over time that have made me go, I know I keep saying that the universe is not, whatever, but that just happened right now. It can't just be random chance. It's like winning lotto chance.
Yeah.
And that has happened numerous times in my life where the video I saw of you happened at 3 years, 4 years before I ever got into radio. Something like that. The distance
Right.
was so great
Hmm.
that I saw you, said, oh man, I got to get to know that person. But, it happens a lot of times. And then I met you and you changed my life. So when I read your first book, like I said, every week we were interviewing different people. Got time to read every book. But I remember getting to a section of your first book where you were describing looking in the mirror.
Oh my gosh.
There you go. Looking in the mirror. It was like one of those paragraph 2. I'm like, looking at it and I'm like, and this is where I kind of felt bad because we're on live radio and I go, and page 72, I love what you said. And you looked at me like, what did I say?
I remember that too.
And I said to myself, I got so into this, I might have left the author behind a little bit. And I remember going, that's okay, I got you.
You
And I went
did.
into it and I said that as a therapist, as a psychologist who work with so many people who look in the mirror and they can't stand the sight of themselves. I don't remember specifically what you said anymore, but what you said on that page was something I could give a lot of people. To open up
Hmm.
and go, let me just read this section to you. And that's a section that when I read it, I was like, yo, that's not corny, that's good. I can
Hmm.
give that to somebody that is looking in that mirror and they can't stand the sight of themselves. So if you haven't read that book, look for that passage.
No, no, I received that. I remember that moment very clearly. I want to get to the radio piece, but just with the intersection of spirituality and mental health
Yes.
psychology, um, I remembered so many times, Dr. Fritz, where we would send different patients or clients to each
Yeah.
other, and you would say that. I actually think you need, when I was a life coach, I think you need a life coach, and I have someone for you. And I'm like, I think you need to actually talk to a psychologist. Where do those worlds sort of intersect where people would need to know where they need to go and who they need to see?
My experience with it is, and I have over the years, over 20 years, done a lot of coaching that initially, people will often come to me in crisis as a therapist.
Mm-mm.
And often their crises are resolved. And then there's a point at which now they need coaching. If the origin of the crises is more of a mental health impairment or condition or diagnosis, I hate to use that word, then a therapist is well trained in different procedures and modalities to help a person work through that. And then when they're ready to actually take that to the next level, they need a coach. And that's why you and I worked really well together with that, because we can then hand people, off to one another when they're ready. If you're coaching somebody and you're giving them the gifts, the tools, the gems,
Mhm.
and they, despite knowing exactly what to do, having the goals, the timeline all set up, keep on getting stuck because of other internal issues. That's kind of when then, okay, they may need to go to see a therapist.
Mhm.
And quite often with the people I work with, they would get through the crisis and then they're like, now what's next?
Yeah.
In some instances, I would begin the coaching process and then send them to other people, professionals, resources to help them take it from there. And if they had any, setbacks or what have you can always come back to me.
Yeah. And I love that because so many people I think are either like, oh, do I need to see a therapist? Do I need to see a coach? And being able to sort of hear that clarification is really
Sure.
helpful, especially for our listeners and viewers of this podcast. You said something not too long ago about being a radio host and hosting a live radio show.
Yes.
For a lot of our folks at home, this podcast definitely surfaces as, how do I use all my gifts and talents to better the human condition? And also, how do I use some of those transferable skills
Mm-hmm.
to do things that I've always dreamed of? How did radio even come across your orb? And how did you go ahead?
Kismet. Random. Ultimately, I think it was less. Well, yeah, we could always attribute it to the universe, but the station was looking for professionals who could come on the air and talk about what they do.
Hmm.
So the people that came to me were the sales force of the radio station.
Got it.
And they came to me, and I was like, I'm not doing that. About me, I'm really an introvert. People often don't believe that
Yes.
in this context, I have to tap into my extroversion and animate, but I'm going to be tired after this. And that's how I know I'm an introvert.
Right.
Energized and also tired. Although, uh, when I get into the flow of it, I actually walk away energized, which is something that you witnessed because you were on the show a number of times.
Yes.
So they come, I tell them no. They said, well, why don't you come to the station and at least do a tour? I said, okay, but the answer is probably going to be no. And I brought a friend with me who's more
Hmm.
conservative on these types of things than I was. So his job was to say no in case I get weak.
Got it.
He came, he's walking around the station. Al Sharpton walks out of a room. I think the governor was there at the time. And he's like, they're giving you an opportunity to be here and you're saying no? I was like, it was going to be your job to tell them no. So we went on. And then somewhere in that time frame, we did 105 episodes in the first iteration, probably another 20 in another iteration of the show.
Mm-hmm.
And then at first 20, about me, the introvert, I'm totally uncomfortable with a microphone talking to potentially 3 million people.
Right.
That wasn't getting easy. And the reason I tell you how many episodes it was, because I remember in like episode 52, you had been on the show by that time. I was like still palpitating. I was still like nervous and all that. And somewhere in one of those episodes, something shifted. And I think it had to have been after our interview, because I was starting to get you was somebody that said that got me motivated to really be working on finding your voice. You was somebody that got me to be thinking about spirituality, not in a religiosity sense, but
Right.
in a more like just start to notice. And you would make very nice suggestions. Just allow yourself to just notice. I'm like, that is really sneaky. Allow yourself to notice. And then I would notice, and I remember during a particular episode, it's like something came off, and I says, time for Fritz to just be Fritz.
Whoa.
Just be Fritz. And that's when it got so much easier for me, because prior to that time, we had different names that we call the show. Ask Dr. Fritz, the Dr. Fritz show.
Mm-hmm.
Every time I heard those things, cringe. Because I hated that idea that it's all on you and it's you. And then at one point I go, oh, wait a minute, Dr. Fritz and all those entities are not me. I'm Fritz. Actually, closest friends now call me Dr. Fritz, and now it's a comfortable title to have. And I remember like, oh. And I also remember, it could have been the episode with you, because I remember at that moment going, oh, I think I've opened up his book, went to some random page, but he wrote that so long ago. He may not be in that mindset, but I'm in that mindset. So you know what? I got you. Author's here, the book's here, we're going to do it. And that was the beginning of being able to just be who you are. So I would say it took about 50, 60 episodes for the version you were hearing on the air, the version you might be seeing here. Like, this is who I am. This is what I'm like. It took me a while to get there.
Yeah.
We were all nervous, live radio.
Oh, but it was so good, to the point friends would call me and say, "Did you hear Dr. Fritz show today? He said this." And I said, "Well, I didn't listen today." And you get this over and over again. But when I sat in the seat to be interviewed, you would not have been able to tell me that you had not done this 1,000 times before. You weren't a career radio disc jockey. Like, all of that just seems so apparent. And you said, letting yourself go and just being Fritz Galette. How do we do that for our listeners?
I think I was achieving that well before I felt it.
Okay.
You've been told you do something. I remember your one-man show. It was amazing. I remember being told you sounded great. You said some impactful things, but it took a while before I felt it. Back to that section of your book, there was something in what you wrote that caused a shift in my understanding of when you tell somebody self-love, You're usually thinking narcissistic. You're usually thinking egocentric. What if I can just kind of look in the mirror and learn to develop an okay ship? I'm okay with this person, or tolerate that the vision of that person. It don't gotta go to I love this person. This person's awesome. It
Yeah.
could simply be I see you. I see me.
Yeah. So clearly, we're in the middle of this podcast, and I am tearing up because uh, you, it's supposed to be about you, Dr. Fritz. It's not supposed to be about me at all.
Yeah, but our paths, man, we did something back there. And here we are.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess for me, as somebody who was just really trying to find their voice, I was just moving from thing to thing, as you're just saying, and I never just stood still. And you are creating some impactful work, and you're, changing people's lives. Like for me, it was, I just want to do the work. I just want to create good art, and I want to be a vessel and just move on. Like I never stopped, and still don't do it as much as I probably should, of just being able to sit in it and
Mm.
be able to say, wow.
There are those moments all the time. Often those around us may not be paying attention to it, or if they do, they might simply say, hey, that was great. And then the moment has moved on. When someone says something nice about what you do, you normally just go, thank you.
Yes.
But what if we kind of in that moment went into it? And that's what I was starting to discover when I was interviewing people, especially when they'd written stuff. Okay, it's a 100-page book, a 200-page book. What if I found just a passage and kind of like sat on it for a little bit and then said, let's do a deep dive there? We're all rushing through life, rushing through moments. Even right now, you're taking the time to slow me down and go, hey, you mentioned that thing there. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And by just inviting me to do that, you're creating a space for me to feel comfortable. The kind of comfort I feel right now is night and day from those days on the air. And it started during those times, meeting people like you who were, yes, you were doing a lot of things, but you were writing it down. And I remember going, oh, but it's even if you're going through a lot of things, not staying with it, I can stay on page 72, paragraph 2, and go and sit with it. And when we would do that, you'd have these real emotional, human, impactful moments, life-changing moments. And that's what I was starting to hear from people who were calling in or saying, that was a great episode. Most of the time, I wouldn't have known what the heck they were talking about.
Right.
So I'd
Right.
go, how was it for you? I made it about them. It was a great episode. It was a great episode for you. Let's get into it.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm so in the moment right now that,
That's it.
yeah, I feel transcended.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that is how you hook me into this spirituality stuff.
What was one of your greatest learning lessons from the show at that period and point in time?
A lot every time, but I look back upon it with I appreciate that I kept doing it. Because like I say, first 30, 40 episodes, I generally felt awful. Generally felt like I don't know what I'm doing. I must sound like this and that. Now people would be saying every episode, great episode, and I'd be like, ugh. And I realized that the thing that was keeping me in that feeling state was some level of an awareness that, oh, you letting a little Fritz out, or the Dr. Fritz lowercase, as opposed to say something doctorly. Well, according to the research, I would try to do things like that, and I would feel awful every time I did that. And I remember my co-host, Melissa, at one point say, Dr. Fritz, say something doctorly. And I think on the air I said, no, that's not how I roll. Ooh, that felt good. Well, you are a doctor. I am, and I know enough to not be sticking my foot in it every single time. And I just started talking like that, and I was like, yo, that's my voice. It's a little bit more my voice.
And I think with the great resignation, as they're calling it, that's happening across, forget about the United States, but just the world in general.
Yes.
Number one thing I always hear is, I had no idea that I have been, in this insufferable job and in this level of a persona for so many years that I can't even recognize my own voice or who I am and what it is that I want. How do we tap into not only discovering our true voice beyond the titles, but how do we live in it?
That's a process that can be a tall order, but we've got to also, you said before, I'm in this moment. Got better at living in the moment. You and I haven't talked in a while. We didn't do any
Right.
green room preparation for this conversation,
Right.
and yet it feels for me like we really did. Um, but I think you knew that we didn't need to do that because you and I were just going to start off from a place of authenticity. That takes practice. Think of every
Mm.
Monday morning, whether you're
Hmm.
online or you're in person these days, and someone goes, "How was your weekend?" That's a question that's in our culture.
Right.
How many of us answer it honestly? How many of us provide the level of detail that the answer really is about? How many of us mean it when we ask the question? How many of us mean to get a real answer? So if we're practicing, it can sound like all out there if I'm saying living in the moment, but it's the small stuff. It is remembering to keep it about whatever it is about in the moment. Hey, I know this is an interview where this, but I'm keeping it about that. You have an intentionality around that.
Yeah.
Having that kind of intentionality with anybody.
Right. And I think it's that intentionality that so many people lack in the world. I was having a interview with a corporation. They wanted me to talk about resilience, and I
Hmm.
asked them, "Well, what's your intention for for this talk?" And one lady truthfully answered the question. Well, we were told by our head of diversity, equity, inclusion that we need to hire a person of color. And I go, "Oh, okay. At least you came to me with the truth.
Yes.
It sounds a little bit ignorant to my ears,
Uh,
but at the same time, thank you for at least telling me you have no intention for me being here other than me being a black person that fits the bill." That level of intentionality or lack thereof, if you will, helps support me in deciding this isn't the speaking engagement for me.
and I'm grateful that you're saying that in the moment. Man, we haven't talked, but we're on the same page because I've been interviewed by lots of people to do that sort of work. And so during the interview, I put air quotes around it. I say to them, if we're doing it for that, then that's not going to be good. And I say it from a more like, hey, you don't want that kind of trouble from me creating for you because if I get in there and it was just a checkbox for you, you're going to have some repercussions. Not in a sense that I would do anything negative, but if you're not in here for the long haul, then don't
Right.
bring somebody who's only here for the long haul.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I can be totally politically correct and not upset anybody. I've been pretty good with that. But if I'm going in there and I'm talking to a group and it's just a checkbox, I won't be able to stay genuine.
Hmm.
You won't be able to sense that I'm completely there for
Right.
the long haul. And so and there is a lot of that. So getting to practice that's again why I said you and I didn't have to sit down to prepare for this because I remember back when sometimes we used to meet at my office and do some recordings.
Yes.
And my attitude was a lot of the stuff that I think, like you think of Prince and the vault, he was
Mhm.
always creating. So therefore, when he actually was on stage, he was amazing
Right.
because he was always creating. This thing that we're doing every day is not it's a dress rehearsal for life, and then every so often the lights are on and the microphone's on and you're there and you're prepared to be. So if you're
Hmm.
not practicing genuine openness, when you try to do it, you might ruffle some feathers, you might not do it right. And at the beginning of the radio program, I was trying to be genuine Dr. Fritz NYU professor, but that's not how Fritz felt.
Hmm.
Fritz felt like it was, again, like lowercase Dr. Fritz, human, genuine. That's not how I roll. And I remember when I said that word, one of the producers behind the screen also noticed when you said that seems like that's you. And you and I would have those conversations where sometimes
Right.
you would say something, I'd be like, yo, that's you.
Yes. Yeah.
Do that. Do more of that.
But that's the I guess the bigger question of do more of that, finding the way in which you roll in the world and letting
Yeah.
that be authentic to who you are. I get letters day after day and DMs about like these kind of conversations, especially at the head of mindfulness and compassion on from LinkedIn last week. And someone replied and said, "Hey, this all sounds wonderful and great. Be in tuned, aha moments, have compassion for other people." But she said, "I don't have compassion for myself. So how do I even dare find authenticity when I don't even have compassion for me?"
Well, you already, I'm saying you already wrote it. You already, like, and then, if people get stuck with that, and I always welcome people to say those kinds of things, because if what I'm saying, okay, I get it, okay, I'm gonna go do it. I'm
Mm.
usually like looking for. We were on live radio, so we were asking for it for
Right.
someone to say, I think that's a whole bunch of crap. Boom, now it's on. Not on like I have a challenge, you're challenging me, but for a lot of people, this is foo-foo, this is woo-sa, this is not gonna
Yeah.
apply. Let's talk about what your lived experience is.
Yes. Yes.
Let's get into that.
Right.
And somewhere in there, we may be able to find. I may not be able to change your mind. Probably not even trying to change your mind. I'm just trying to connect you to the possibility. And if you're listening to me talk about self love and confidence and all of that, and you feel like this, and most of what I say ain't gonna hit unless I get connected or you show me some of the genuine feeling of self loathing that you have. Oh,
Hmm.
that's there. Well, then let's talk with that. Bring that in. Really?
You better preach, Dr. Fritz. You better preach up here. And so in the world, as we've been seeing, and I feel like for folks like you and I who've been doing this work for a long period of time, I think about like the rupture that people like to have, in air quotes for folks who can't see it, when George Floyd died, when all the unrest was happening around the world, and now questions around reproductive rights, and I mean anything that is an issue, it's here and it's present. Do you feel as I do that this was to me like this was bound to happen, because I feel like so many of us have been walking around like zombies, ignoring all the things that have been in front of us, not in connection, forget about with ourselves, or excuse me, other people or higher power, but with ourselves. And it just seems like now we cannot ignore any longer all the stuff that has been unbalanced for a long period of time. What are
Mm.
your thoughts?
The more I talk to people about their experiences, the more I go to corporations and talk about those experiences, the more I find out that the things that are triggering us, they were going on already. We're just now
Thank
in a world
you.
where we can see them. We see them. So the 10 minutes of George Floyd was for a lot of people enough to go viral enough for them to go beyond thinking to
Hmm.
feeling. And that happened in the context of a pandemic. We're all sequestered at home, so we got a lot of time on our hands to watch these things and to be exposed to them, and it's incubating. But we're talking centuries of atrocities and all these injustices going on,
Hmm.
and we are just being made aware of them, not just intellectually, but as we're getting triggered, we're feeling. And so, one of the things that I do when I'm working, especially when I'm trying to facilitate groups to talk about this stuff, I'm trying to get people to develop a culture of listening, deep, compassionate listening, allowing yourselves not just to go into the frontal cortex and get it on an intellectual level, but to work to feel.
Hmm.
And I believe that that practice, you could be sitting across from somebody who's way on the other political side of the aisle,
Right.
but that person still has fears, aspirations, motivations. They still can feel. They're human. how they are triggered, what they're triggered by might be very different than you and me, but they have the capacity. I
Hmm.
mean, it's a general condition of things. And we're often not taking the time to do so. It's as soon as we find out something about them. You voted for who? This is your position on mask. This is your position on vaccines. We often turn off,
Right.
and I'm often leaning in. And the research on this is showing that if you can get people to, when they find somebody who's very different, lean in a little bit and go, "Tell me more." You're going to get closer to their lived experience. Their heart beats, their blood circulates. We're going to get closer to that. We're
Hmm.
going to move away. I remember a person told me that who they voted for in the last presidential election, and they thought we were going to have a back and forth about that. And I was more like, "Wow, what was that like for you? What was that like telling me? Or I thought you were going to get mad at me." "Oh, how do you feel now?" "I don't know. I'm kind of surprised. I knew this person for 20 years. We never talked politics before,
Right.
but we had talked humanity before. We had talked lived experience. We had talked, shaking your
Hmm.
hand. Your hands are warm. You
Hmm.
made a different decision in the ballot box, and we could go. And I could totally disagree with it. I think I could be mad at you for it. But let's start here."
Hmm.
And so I'm usually inspiring and trying to get people to get into a culture of dialogue, not debate, not discussion, but dialogue, where my goal is to deeply listen to you and develop a certain level of empathy and compassion for you, not the things you do I don't like, but for you, because that's where I see a lot of change can be made in this world.
Hmm. Did your work change at all, or was it enhanced by all that was happening during that time and that's happening now?
Both. Back to that universe and spirituality, everything from my youth, taking apart a telephone and being technological, I'm always utilizing that. I'm always trying to utilize the gifts, the experiences, the chance occurrences, the friendships, the connections. Because I'm now increasingly, here it is, here's the breaking news. I'm really believing in that universal connection. And that came from me, not through somebody just telling me and me having faith in it. It actually came from me through the scientific method of having the evidence over and over and over again. That lesson learned in 1972 is a lesson that I'm utilizing right now and is benefiting someone I'm working with right now.
Yeah. And does that cause any kind of conflicts in your community, like having that spiritual sort of belief system? Like, are other psychologists or mental health professionals there?
Um, they are, and the language is an interesting thing. You can often choose the words that are going to allow people to swallow and allow people to stay in the dialogue. And sometimes you can't help. If I'm in a facilitated group about critical race theory, just saying critical race theory, I've triggered some people who are like,
Yeah.
that's not a thing. But I'm all like, "Ooh, you feel that's not a thing? Let's talk.
Yeah.
Let's stay here. Stay at the table." As opposed to ostracizing you and separating you. Because we're all the American and a lot of our world systems are tend to try to make us be individualistic. But back to spirituality and universality, we're all connected.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so funny. I have a really good friend, and she has been on the podcast, and she listens quite often. And she sent me this text message. She's Republican, and she sent me this message and just said, "Thank you so much for loving me and being my friend." I'm like,
Beautiful.
Of course. What do you mean?" She goes, "I remember when so many of your friends said, 'Why would you be friends with her?' Knowing who she's voted for, knowing her, conservative background and that kind of thing." And to your point, I remember saying, she and I connect on such a deep spiritual level, on such a deep human to human level.
Yeah,
And it's always rooted in compassion for each other, and we listen to each
yes,
other. That's the difference to
that's the
me, and
difference.
that's a reason why she's my friend.
Right. So a lot of our current American politics is taking that person and pushing them away.
Right.
So then we're going to be surprised at the election results when we didn't have other people at the table hearing about their lived experiences.
Yeah.
When you get communities to share vision, share meaning, shared experiences, they don't become a homogenous. decision making, they become a stronger, heterogeneous populace. But when you separate people out, that's when you create a lot of radical, extreme factions that are not getting the benefit of knowledge of the other person's felt experience, lived experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
my professional world is about, meaning as a psychologist, as a therapist, is about getting the person to connect the parts of themselves that they've ostracized, that they've sectioned off. And as that person develops a more unified acceptance and love for the self, or acceptance or connection to the self, they become a more powerful agent in the groups and families that they're in.
Mm.
And then they really start to grow. And guess what happens when they start to grow? If you're in a family, group, or system and you start to grow, we got to include the system.
Right.
So if you do individual therapy with someone who's developing and growing and becoming transcendent, if their partner or spouse, I've had people not tell their partner or spouse they were in therapy. Now they're developing and growing, and now they're looking at the person saying, "I don't know if I want to be with you anymore."
Right.
Well, of course you don't. You've grown. You got to get them
Yes.
to come with some growth.
Right. Right. And so, do you think that a lot of what we're experiencing in the world and with all these external community, it really starts with us being clear about who we are and getting to know the lack of self love or the love we have for us?
Yeah, and that's a lifelong process. It doesn't was not one day that Dr. Fritz walks in the mirror and I go, "I'm here. I love myself." No.
Yeah.
And no one would ever believe me, like, bazillion episodes of doing this stuff and sounding great, air quotes, to other people. It's like, yeah, I still think I stink. Oh, but now being able to say that and not have somebody whisk it away and go, huh, I could work on that. We're always going to be on that path, and we can do so much more if we start to shed some of that. Because there'll always be challenges, but we can
Right.
do so much more if we're not bogged down. I'm often working with writers who have the most amazing ideas in the world, but they just can't get themselves to put it out there because of the
Mhm.
stuff that's on them.
Right.
And then another stage of people who are able to put themselves out there but not complete it. And other people who can put it themselves out there and not promote it. So I'm usually pushing and assisting people through those processes to get to the point where it's like, all right, I did it. How do you feel? I feel all right. I'll go for all right.
Hmm. So then, how do we get on the path to even start that journey? Because to your point, podcast listeners here always say, I can't even think about it. I'm scared of it, or I'm on the journey, but I can't complete it. I can't press the send email. How do we get started on that process?
It starts with the moment. So when somebody says to me, I'm going to try, let's try right now. I got time. Okay. They're not expecting that. They want to put it off. They want to put it off. But like in the moment, I can't imagine. Well, let's have a thought experiment. Let's work on imagining.
Huh.
I had a person tell me they were too afraid to make a phone call to a particular employer or something like that. It's in their session. And I was like, make the call right now. I'm here, providing a holding space and a safe space. I'm going to provide a support space for you to just do that thing. I'm not doing it for
Wow.
you. But whatever it is, people make a New Year's resolution. I think we did a couple of shows on New Year's resolutions, and what we were finding, research and experiences as well, is that as soon as you're putting this thing off to the thing you're going to do on January 1st, you're
Hmm.
probably setting yourself up to fail. So if it's a resolution today and in September, then let's start putting the plans together to do it now.
Yeah.
This heart beating and this blood circulating is not guaranteed, so let's get on it. And if you struggle with that, that's when people are seeking us out to create
Hmm.
the supports so that they can start to move that ball. It's
Yeah.
as simple as that. One of my interviews was with a cognitive behavioral psychologist who'd written books on. It was Kerry Patterson who wrote the book Change Anything. And I remember him saying to me, Dr. Fritz, you therapists out there in the Northeast, you're all about this introspection and all of that. He says, well, in your experience, he's much older than I am. What works? He says, you got to get people doing, not trying. Oh, you get all Star Wars on me here. Do it. And I remember going, okay. And that's what's worked. Getting people doing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so in terms of just where we are right now, especially this week, let's talk about like Ida. I was telling my partner Joshua that I was so excited to talk to you because I remember Hurricane Sandy being in the studio with you and Alana Foy. And listeners would call in, and we were holding this space
Yes.
for people. Go ahead.
Yeah. No.
Yeah,
You're bringing the vision back.
we were holding space for all of these people who were impacted by the hurricane, and we somehow got down to the station. He said, if you can get here, this is what we're going to do. And I was telling Joshua, I wish that there was a live space that people could have gone to after Ida or during Ida that we had.
Hmm. Yeah, and the spaces that people are going to that are not so live, they might be the CNN school, they might be.
Mm.
We do have a need for that, and what we learned in episodes or periods like that is that when um, the world is going as such, where our future and our lives are threatened, we need to come together and commune with one another. We don't need to compete. We need to be in community with one another.
Hmm.
So it's always about trying to. I mean, one of my goals is always about creating that space. Creating that space for people to talk about things doesn't literally solve the problem that they might come into that space for, but it might give them a little bit more opening so
Yeah.
that they can be creating and innovating around those solutions. But when we're isolated and separated and we're not doing that, we're like stuck. A writer who's in writer's block, the age old thing is get them to write about anything. What you're trying to do is in the moment do.
Mm-hmm.
A depressed person telling me that they want to die and they're sitting in my space, they're honoring me with that information because they can't say that to anybody else. I'm allowing them to be in that space to say that thing, and we're breathing together and we're taking the time, and and the successful ending of that session, we have a plan for the next meeting and a plan of action to continue doing. We don't make that plan, person might go along with the suicidal plan.
Right. So then how do we reconnect or even connect with I guess, a greater sense of ourselves, having been locked up for such a long period of time? I have a really good friend who is so petrified to step outside because of COVID, and has isolated himself, in his home and in his space. And he wants to reengage in community, but he is so incredibly afraid of COVID and of dying.
Mm-hmm. I continue to engage the person within who part of themselves is the fear is also the part of the self that wants to protect, wants to take care of.
Hmm.
So, while yes, we can sometimes go with a cognitive approach to it and showing them the evidence as to here what the numbers are, but parts of ourself are still activated and around that, and we have to then talk to that part. Just noticing the part of yourself that's trying to take care of yourself, even though the intellectual part of yourself may know it's safe out there. There's another part of you that's trying to take care of yourself.
Hmm.
Let's if that part of yourself is open to talking right now or feeling, or probably a more powerful therapy, not just a therapy tool, but it's just, I'm just going to be with you right now.
Hmm.
I have this amount of time, and I hear you. I hear that's what's going on for you. It to describe it intellectually doesn't do it justice, but any of us know that when we walked into a space and we had something that we were upset about, and our space was like, yeah, we feel something. But when
Yeah.
our space is like, nah, that ain't it, you're wrong, we have to take that thing and pack it up.
Dr. Fritz, listen, I I am beyond overjoyed for this long overdue conversation, this reunion. Speaking of synchronicity, we're in season 8 and this is episode 8. And as soon as I started to plug those numbers in, I was like, there's some synchronicity that's happening here. Where can our audience engage you, learn more about you, and be able to connect with you in the work that you do?
Oh my goodness. Well, you can always Google Fritz Galette and hopefully find good things about me. Um, my private practice is transitioned from a single practitioner to a group that I work with. I'm
Hmm.
mostly the supervisor and trainer. Occasionally take on clients, so that's Positive Psych. Um, PositivePsychNYC.com. Hear me now, not remembering websites. I've got a lot of websites. Um, But I also do the corporate work through this great leadership company called lobeleadership.com or Lobe Leadership. And originally, when you and I were working together more on the radio, I was trying to do that corporate work by myself. I was trying to do too many things by myself. So what Lobe Leadership is kind of like the support I needed to, they either find me the gigs or I get them and I go, hey, talk to them and schedule it so I can just come in there and just be Fritz. So Positive Psych NYC and lobeleadership.com.
Yeah. Dr. Fritz, I just really want to tell you, like, you have come into my life and changed it in so many different ways, in ways in which I don't think you even know. You brought it up like the one man show, and I remember telling you afterwards I forgot the entire script, and I was just going off of my own.
That was the moment.
But that would not have happened if I didn't go back to sitting in your office and you saying you need to let go of the persona Clay and just be. And I remember sitting in the first segment of that show and saying, oh shit, I forgot the script. And I'm like, what do I do? Dr. Fritz said, just be. And I remember feeling otherworldly, like I wasn't even there. And I just went for it for a whole hour and forgot. But that's what I'm telling you, the level of impact and influence you've had on my life. So I know you've had that on other people's lives. I just can't thank you enough for being such a really strong mentor and friend in my life. It's made a huge difference to me.
Well, I could say the same thing. So our ears will continue to ring with an acknowledgement of the blessings and the impact we've had. And yes, I know that I've had impact on people's lives. I know you've had impact on people's lives. That's why we came together, joined forces, and we're still moving along together.
Yeah. We're still moving along together. So listen, folks, I'll have all of Dr. Fritz's information at the base of this podcast. Remember, you can learn more about me by visiting clayswilliams.com. And I'm on all of your favorite social media by the handle of @PlanA with Clay. That's @PlanA with Clay. Remember, folks, Clay is with a K. Thanks for listening. I look forward to seeing you in our very next episode of Plan A Conversations. Happy Labor Day. Peace, guys.